Welcome to this explainer. Today we're exploring exactly what Bandura's Bobo doll experiment was. We're going to unpack a massive fundamental question about human nature. Like, how exactly do we learn our behavior? To figure that out, we are diving into one of the most famous and, let's be honest, most intensely debated psychological investigations of the entire 20th century. Okay, let's dive into this. Are we born aggressive, or do we learn it? It's a question that has completely fascinated parents, researchers, and society as a whole for decades. Are our most violent tendencies hardwired right into our DNA from day one? Or do we pick them up from our environment, literally just by watching the people around us? To find the answer, we've got to travel all the way back to 1961. Section 1. Meet the Bobo doll. To test whether kids would actually imitate an aggressive role model, psychologist Albert Bandura set up a fascinating case study at the Stanford University Nursery, and it totally changed the field of psychology forever. His primary tool for this? A 5-foot-tall inflatable clown. Yep, the Bobo doll. Now, Bandura didn't just grab a random handful of kids. The experiment involved exactly 72 young children, 36 boys and 36 girls, all aged between 3 and 5 years old. And here's a really vital detail. Before the experiment even began, the nursery staff rated every single child's existing aggression levels. Bandura then used those ratings to carefully match the kids into groups, ensuring each condition had a perfectly equal balance of naturally aggressive and non-aggressive kids. Bandura utilized a highly structured approach to really isolate his variables. The procedure itself had 3 meticulous phases. First up, exposure to the adult model. Second, a mild aggression arousal phase. And finally, observation for delayed imitation. Basically, watching to see if they'd actually copy what they just witnessed. Section 2, the 1961 experiment. So what actually happened behind those closed nursery doors? Let's walk through the strange and, honestly, somewhat shocking situations these young children were put in. The kids were tested individually. They were brought into a room filled with high-interest activities. Potato prints, stickers, fun stuff. Meanwhile, an adult model sat in the opposite corner with a toy set, a mallet, and that Bobo doll. Now here is where the groups diverge. In the aggressive condition, the adult model would play quietly for about a minute and then suddenly just turn on the Bobo doll. They'd hit it with the mallet, punch it right in the nose, toss it up in the air, and yell these specific pre-planned phrases like pow, sock him, or kick him. Contrast that with the non-aggressive condition. Those kids watched an adult completely ignore the Bobo doll and just quietly assemble Tinker Toys for the entire 10 minutes. After watching the adult, the kids moved to phase 2, the frustration phase. Researchers brought the kids into a totally new room packed with incredibly attractive toys. We're talking a fire engine, a spinning top, the works. But just 2 minutes in, the experimenter stopped them. She literally told them these were her very best toys and they were reserved for other children. Now, why do that? Well, this deliberate mild aggression arousal was designed to make sure all the kids felt a baseline level of frustration. They needed a standardized urge to act out before that final observation phase. Finally, the children were placed in a room with a Bobo doll and observed through a one-way mirror for 20 minutes. And wow, the findings were compelling. Children who watched the aggressive model were significantly more likely to be aggressive towards the doll themselves. They literally imitated the specific behaviors they saw. But check out this breakdown. The boys engaged in twice as much physical aggression, while the girls, they were way more prone to verbal aggression, especially, and this is super interesting, especially if they had observed a female role model. Now, what's really interesting about this original 1961 data is that, well, obviously the aggressive group grabbed all the headlines. But look at the non-aggressive condition. Kids exposed to the quiet, non-aggressive models actually spent more than twice as much time simply sitting quietly, doing absolutely nothing compared to the aggressive group. So the models didn't just teach violence, they also successfully modeled calm restraint. Section 3, Social Learning Theory Explained. From all this raw data, Bandura didn't just write a paper and call it a day. He constructed an entirely new psychological framework. He pushed back hard against the dominant theories of the time, which basically claimed we only learn through direct rewards or punishments. He called his new framework social learning theory, which he later updated to social cognitive theory. It proposes that we learn largely through observation, imitation, and modeling. Think about it in today's world, when you mimic a makeup tutorial from a YouTube influencer, or your younger sibling starts copying the exact way you talk. That is social learning theory in action. We watch, we process, and we imitate. But Bandura argued we don't just blindly copy every single thing we see like robots. We filter behavior through 4 specific internal checkpoints. He called these mediational processes. First up, attention. The behavior has to actually grab our focus. Second, retention. We have to remember it. Third, reproduction. We actually need the physical capability to perform the act. And finally, motivation. We have to weigh the risks and rewards and genuinely want to do it.
Section 4. Rewards, Punishments, and Media.
Let's move on and see how this built into Bandura's later research. In 1963 and 1965, he expanded his experiments way beyond just live adults in a room. He turned his attention to the rising power of screens, television, cartoons, and the consequences of the actions being broadcast. In his 1963 variation, Bandura tested symbolic modeling. He had kids watch live adults, films adults, and even a cartoon character named Herman the Cat beating up a Bobo doll. And surprisingly, exposure to humans portraying aggression on film was the most influential in shaping violent behavior. Bandura even pointed to real-world incidents at the time, like boys imitating a dangerous switchblade knife scene they saw on TV from the movie Rebel Without a Cause, which resulted in actual real injuries. The screen, it turned out, was a shockingly powerful teacher. And this brilliantly illustrates his 1965 follow-up on vicarious reinforcement. In this study, the kids watched the model act aggressively, but then they saw the model either rewarded with candy and praise or punished by being hit with a rolled-up wooden golf club. The result? Kids who saw the model rewarded were highly likely to imitate the violence. On the flip side, kids who saw the model punished were significantly less likely to do it. So we don't just learn from the action itself, we learn from the consequences that happen to others.
Section 5. Flaws and Modern Criticisms.
But here is where we encounter a massive twist in this whole investigative case study. Despite its immense fame, it's a foundational staple in pretty much every psychology textbook, modern psychology views this classic experiment through a highly, highly critical lens. Take a look at this striking quote from a 1996 evaluation. Critics basically argue that these kids weren't actually being malicious or aggressive at all. They were just engaging in rough and tumble play. They knew the Bobo doll was a toy, not a real person, and they had absolutely no intent to cause actual harm.
Furthermore, if you look at it by today's standards, this experiment completely violated modern ethical codes. First off, toddlers obviously cannot give valid informed consent. They also had zero right to withdraw from what was clearly a confusing and frustrating situation. There was no debriefing afterwards to explain to the kids that the violence they saw was staged. And ethically speaking, deliberately teaching young children aggressive behaviors could potentially cause long-term harm to their well-being. Plus, the setting itself had what psychologists call low ecological validity. Kids don't normally hang out in sterile laboratories observing random adult strangers. So the crucial point is that a lot of this might have actually been skewed by the toy itself. When the experiment was repeated later in 1990, researchers found something fascinating. Children who had never seen a Bobo doll before were up to 5 times more likely to imitate the aggressive behavior than kids who were already familiar with it. This strongly suggests that the sheer novelty of the doll is what drove the imitation rather than some deep-seated transfer of violent tendencies. And that brings us to the concept of demand characteristics. Just put yourself in the shoes of a 4-year-old for a second. You are dropped into a strange room, and a strange adult aggressively hits a toy right in front of you. Given no other instructions, wouldn't you kind of just assume that hitting the toy is exactly what the adults want you to do? Some psychologists argue the study mostly just proves that young kids are incredibly good at following implied directions to please grown-ups. Ultimately, it forces us to ask this critical question. The Bobo doll is essentially a weighted balloon toy. It is entirely designed to be punched so it can bounce back up. Does hitting an inflatable punching bag actually tell us anything meaningful about physical aggression toward living, breathing human beings or real-world criminal behavior? Many modern critics say absolutely not. But despite all of its flaws, Bandura's work undeniably shifted how we view human learning forever. We don't live in a vacuum, Our environment shapes us. So I'll leave you with this to reflect on. As you go about your day-to-day, consuming media, scrolling through your phone, interacting with colleagues, how much of your own behavior is a truly conscious choice? And how much is simply a reflection of what you've been observing all along?